That night the kitchen glowed with yellow light, the warmth of the stew still lingering in the air. The table was set with stir-fried vegetables and hot soup, but no one touched their chopsticks. Silence. A heavy silence, compressed, like a storm waiting to break. I sat at the head of the table, the place I had always sat for years. To my right, my wife held a spoon of soup, her hand trembling, every scoop spilling drops onto the table. To my left, my daughter kept her head down, picking at her vegetables mechanically, her eyes red but refusing to lift. Across from me sat my son. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes filled with arrogance, reeking of alcohol. His shirt was wrinkled and stained from the scuffle at the bar. I had just brought him back from the police station less than an hour earlier. This wasn't the first time. I had grown used to those late-night phone calls, the warnings. Mr. John, come pick up your son. He's in trouble again. This time, I had driven in silence, opened the door in silence, watched him walk in like a stranger. I thought silence would be better, but the fire inside me burned hotter. The air at dinner was suffocating. The clink of my wife's spoon hitting the bowl sounded like heavy metal striking my heart. My daughter stole quick glances at her brother, then quickly lowered her head again. I swallowed hard and set my chopsticks down. I looked straight at my son, my voice low but pressing each word. Son, how long do you plan to live like this? Your friends may abandon you, but your father never will. I've worked my whole life just to see you become a decent man. You can't keep sliding down this path. Slowly he lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot, gaze wobbling between drunkenness and defiance. His lips curved, half a sneer, half mockery. What do you know about my life? You're just a weak old man who doesn't understand anything about us. My heart clenched, but I tried to hold steady, my voice heavy as stone. I don't need to understand everything, but I know what responsibility means, and I need you to understand. Being a man means you can't just think about yourself. My hands clenched under the table, veins rising. I glanced at my wife. She kept her head down, eyes wet. My daughter trembled, her chopsticks stabbing into her rice, afraid to breathe. My son laughed dryly, a bitter, mocking laugh. He grabbed his spoon and slammed it hard against the table. The sharp metallic clang tore the silence apart. Then he shouted, straight into my face in front of everyone. You're weak. You're useless. You've never done anything for this family. I froze. The sound roared in my ears like thunder. I felt the spoon slip from my trembling fingers, clattering into the bowl with a hollow clang, like a death knell for my pride. My wife flinched, her hands shaking, spilling soup across the table. My daughter stiffened, her face pale, her eyes welling with tears she dared not shed. In that moment, I heard something louder than the spoon's fall, the collapse inside my heart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slam the table and shout, do you think who carried the cement bags and steel beams under sun and rain? Who broke his back in factories so you could go to school? Who endured fevers yet still went to work, just so you could have the same shoes as your friends? But my throat locked tight. Every word was trapped, leaving only my ragged breath. I looked at the boy, the son I had given my youth to raise. He sat there, young face but arrogant eyes, brimming with contempt. In those eyes there was no respect left for his father. No one said another word. Dinner dragged on in horrifying silence. My wife wiped her tears, pretending to ladle more soup. My daughter hunched over, shoulders shaking, and me I sat frozen, staring at some invisible spot on the wall. hollow inside. When he spoke those words, I knew I had lost more than just a peaceful meal. I had lost my place in my own home. A man may lose money, health, even dreams. But to lose the respect of his child, that is death while still breathing. That night, when everyone had gone to their rooms, I sat alone in the dark. The kitchen light was off, only moonlight spilling through the window. I raised my calloused hand into the dim glow. The scars were still there, silent witnesses. For years I had hidden them, so my son would only see an ordinary father. And because I hid them, now, in his eyes, I was nothing but weak and useless. Just one sentence, and a lifetime of sacrifice was erased to nothing. That sentence kept echoing in my head, even after dinner had passed in deadly silence. I sat there, not knowing how many more bites of rice I had forced down. In truth, every grain had turned into a stone in my throat, stuck and refusing to go down. No one in the house dared to speak further. My wife kept her head down, her eyes red, lips pressed tight. My daughter sometimes stole a glance at me, then quickly turned away, afraid that if our eyes met, she would burst into tears. And my son, after hurling that insult, he sat in silence, his face still cold. Perhaps the alcohol numbed him, or perhaps he believed he had just spoken the truth. That attitude was more painful than his words. I sat frozen, my hands trembling on the table. A chill crawled up my spine, seized my skull. In my ears, sounds distorted. The clink of spoons, the faint sighs, all melted into a dull, roaring storm inside my head. For a moment, I wished I could stand up and walk out, escape from hearing, from seeing. But my legs felt nailed to the floor. Dinner ended. No one said the usual words. No, I'm done. No, I'll do the dishes. Everyone left in silence, afraid to meet each other's eyes. I remained alone at the table, staring at the dishes gone cold. The soup had congealed, the oil solidified, bowls scattered. But I didn't move to clean. I sat still, hands on the table, eyes fixed on nothing. My wife came over, placed a trembling hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "Come, it's over. Rest now." I didn't look up or answer. I only heard her sigh, then the sound of her footsteps fading. The kitchen was left to me and the dark corners. The ceiling light cast its dull yellow glow, stretching my shadow across the wall, crooked, hunched, like an old, broken figure. I lowered my gaze to my hands. The fingers trembled, veins protruding. For years, these hands had lifted bricks, carried steel, worked until raw. Now they only trembled helplessly at my son's words. I pressed a hand to my chest. My heart pounded, each beat like a blade. I tried to breathe deeply, but my lungs felt bound tight. My fingers clawed into the table's edge, the wood scratching under my nails. In my head, those words echoed without end. Weak, useless, never. I thought of my father, poor but stern. Even in poverty, no child dared insult him. I remembered the lashes of his cane when I was late to school, the days he made me toil in the fields until I collapsed. I once resented him, but I never dishonored him. And now, here I was, branded useless by my own son. That pain was unlike any I had known. I had been crushed by steel beams, shocked by electricity, broken bones in falls, but those healed. This wound, I knew it would bleed forever inside me. I lost sense of time. My daughter crept out, holding a glass of water. She placed it beside me and whispered, "Dad, drink." I looked up. Her eyes were swollen red, lashes wet. I tried to smile, but only managed a trembling grimace. I nodded, pushed the glass closer, but didn't drink. She stood there a moment, then slipped back, her footsteps soft as if afraid I might shatter. Alone again, I rose slowly and went to the living room. I sat on the sofa. The dim lamp cast my reflection in the wall mirror. A man stared back, sunken eyes, sagging skin, body slumped. Was that still me, or only a hollow shell? In my head, the words replayed. I shut my eyes, clamped my hands over my ears, but they rang clear, carved into my blood. "You're weak. You're useless. You've never done anything for this family." I leaned my head back, eyes to the ceiling. Tears broke free, hot against my cheeks. I didn't want to cry before them, but in the dark, I couldn't stop. Each tear carried a memory. The night I rode through storms to bring medicine to my fevered son. The day I pawned our wedding ring to pay his tuition. The hours in the hospital, giving my blood for his mother. All these memories I had hidden. I thought fathers should never claim credit. I thought sacrifice was natural. But silence too long turned sacrifice invisible. And in his eyes I was nothing but weak and useless. That night I didn't sleep. I sat still until dawn's dim light crept through the window, my chest still heavy, my heart locked in pain that had nowhere to go. That night, as the pale light of dawn began to seep through the window, I still sat motionless, my mind caught in a spiral. The pain locked in my chest refused to fade, and then memories dragged me back to my youth, where it all began. I remembered the first day I left my small town, stepping into the city with nothing but a few torn clothes and a bag of dry bread, my mother stuffed into my hand before I boarded the train. I swore to her that I would earn money, that she would not live poor forever. I didn't know that vow would chain me for life. In those early years on construction sites, I did every job. Hauling cement, carrying steel, cutting iron. My back drenched in sweat each day, my hands bleeding with scratches. But I gritted my teeth and endured. I thought only, I must hold on. I cannot give up. Once, a steel bar fell on my leg, cracking bone, blood everywhere. The doctor said rest for 3 months. I rested 1 week, then limped back, bandaged tight, pushing through pain. I needed money, for I had begun to raise a family. I remembered the day my wife was pregnant. The news filled me with both joy and fear. Joy at having a child, fear of doubled burdens. I threw myself into work, day and night, shifts back to back. I slept on sacks of cement, body caked with dust. I thought, as long as my child was born into a warm house and a decent crib, all this pain was worth it. But life was never easy. When my wife gave birth, the baby was weak, kept in an incubator, hospital bills stacked up. I sold our only wedding ring to pay part of it. My heart ached as I handed it over. But I told myself, a ring can be lost, but not a child. I never told my wife. In her eyes, I wanted to remain strong. As my son grew, I kept sacrificing. One night, when he burned with fever, no cars were near. I ran miles through rain to find a taxi. At the hospital, when blood was needed, I stretched out my arm. I collapsed beside the bed, dizzy from loss, but smiled seeing him breathe steady. I remembered his first day of school. how he begged for shoes like his friends. I saw the price tag, my chest tightening. I knew I didn't have enough. That night, I worked extra, hauling crates until my hands tore open. The next morning, I brought home the shoes. His eyes lit up, and I thought, worth it. Even if my hands bleed, it's worth it. Through it all, I hid every wound. I wore long sleeves to cover scars. I never wanted him to see me weak. I thought I was protecting him, but hiding turned sacrifice invisible. I remembered when the doctor said, "Mr. John, your knees are gone. Keep working heavy jobs, and you'll be crippled." I smiled, nodded, and went back the next day. I thought, even crippled, my family won't suffer. I gave away my strength, my youth, my health. The price is my shaking hands, my weak legs, and now my son's contempt. Memories piled up, sweat dripping at construction sites, nights counting coins for medicine and tuition, each scar carved deeper, all to keep my family safe. But today, when my son told me I'd never done anything for this family, I realized all that sacrifice had become invisible. In his eyes, I was nothing but weak. I covered my face, tears leaking between my fingers, my chest heavy. I wanted to scream, to collapse. I wished he could see these memories, see the nights I bled for him. But memories live only in me. And he, who benefited, never knew. In the wind outside, I heard echoes of the past. Workers shouting, machines roaring, doctors speaking firmly, a child laughing in new shoes. They all crashed together inside me. I knew they would not stay buried. They rose, urging me to show him, to let him know what he has never seen. That night I swore silently, if the day comes when my son dares look me in the eye, I will let him see it all. I will no longer hide my wounds. I will make him know that what he calls weakness is the strength that held this family standing. After the flood of memories returned, I sat frozen, eyes wide open in the dark. The ticking of the clock on the wall echoed, each beat like a drill boring into my temples. Time dragged so slowly I felt trapped in a room with no door, no exit. Inside me, chaos screamed. It was no longer just pain, but resentment compressed tight. I was angry that my years of silence had become the reason my son erased everything. I was angry that these hands, which once built this roof, now trembled uselessly before him. And I was furious with myself for letting every sacrifice fall into shadow, for becoming the useless old man in the eyes of the one I loved most. My throat closed. I wanted to scream, to smash something, but my body was too frail. All I could hear was the storm in my chest, blood roaring in my ears. I stepped onto the porch, sat still under the pale moonlight. The street lay empty. Dogs barked far away. The wind scraped across corrugated roofs. I lit a cigarette, the smoke stinging my eyes. It had been years since my last one. I had quit to live longer for my family. Now I wondered what the point of living longer was, if it only meant hearing my own child call me useless. The smoke trembled in my thin hand. In my mind, two voices fought. One whispered, "Stop. Enough. You have sacrificed your whole life. Let them fend for themselves." The other roared, "No, you cannot end like this. You cannot let him remember you as weak. You must prove it. You must show him." I paced the house like a caged animal. My steps struck the cold tiles, the echo like metal clanging inside my chest. I stopped at my son's door. I heard faint snores, the rustle of him turning. My hand gripped the knob, fingers shaking, but I let go. If I entered, I might unleash anger I could never take back. I returned to the living room, collapsed onto the sofa, holding my head. Outside, wind slipped through cracks, carrying icy drafts. I looked up at the family photo the day he graduated high school. He stood in the middle, smiling brightly in his gown, and I stood beside him, hand on his shoulder, eyes filled with pride. Back then, I thought, every hardship was worth it. But now that same boy had erased it all with one sentence. My chest twisted, resentment rising like fire. It felt like a lump of molten iron lodged inside me, impossible to swallow or spit out. I wanted to forget, but couldn't. I wanted to forgive, but the wound still bled. For the rest of the night, I never slept. I only sat, listening to the wind lash the roof, cats crying in the alley, my son shifting in his bed. Each sound pierced me, yet with every sound, a resolve grew stronger. I would not let this story end in bitterness. I would not let useless father become etched in his mind. I did not yet know how, but I was certain. One day he would face the truth, and in that endless stretch of hours, I swore I would never hide my wounds again. I would show him that what he calls weakness is, in fact, the strength that kept this family alive. That morning the sun had risen, but it could not dispel the heavy gloom inside the house. I sat slumped on the chair, eyelids heavy after a night without sleep. My body felt drained, yet my mind was stretched tight like a wire about to snap. The door to my son's room opened. He walked out with dark circles under his eyes, clothes wrinkled and disordered, the stale smell of alcohol still clinging to his shirt. He did not greet anyone, did not look at me, only grabbed his backpack and headed straight for the door. I wanted to call out, to say something, but my throat was parched. The sound stuck in my chest. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving a hollow ache inside me. Only a few minutes later, a loud crash erupted on the street, sharp and metallic, followed by a scream from a passerby. My heart jolted. Without thinking, I leapt up and ran outside. The scene before me froze the blood in my veins. His motorbike lay collapsed at the roadside, its wheels still spinning. Smoke curled from the exhaust. My son lay sprawled near the curb, body twisted, blood running from his forehead. A black car had screeched to a stop just a few feet away. 1 second slower, and his body would have been crushed. I rushed forward, pain in my knees like knives, but I felt nothing except urgency. Dropping down beside him, I slid my arms under his body. His flesh was hot and heavy, limp like a broken doll. The stench of blood filled my nose. With trembling arms, I pulled him away from the road, inch by inch, every step weighed down with desperation. Shards of glass bit into my skin. Blood welled and dripped from my arm, but I ignored it. My back bent under the strain. My legs shook violently, yet I clung to him, dragging him to safety. An old father scorned as useless, now pouring out the last of his strength to shield his son. "Dad," he whispered weakly, voice trembling. I cradled his head against my chest, my bloody hand in his hair, and murmured through a tight throat, "I'm here. No one will take you from me." People gathered, voices rising. Someone called an ambulance. Others lifted the bike away. But I stayed crouched, holding him, our blood soaking together, warm and frightening, binding us in a vow beyond words. When the ambulance arrived, the medics rushed with a stretcher. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. Two men caught me under the arms as blood streamed down my sleeve. I gritted my teeth, refusing to cry out. I would not let him see his father collapse. I wanted him to remember, in that moment of danger, his father was present, unyielding. On the ambulance, I sat at his side, my arm tied hastily with cloth to stem the bleeding. He turned his head toward me, eyes wide and wet. The arrogance was gone. In its place were shock, fear, and the first flicker of remorse. His lips moved as if to speak, but I pressed a hand to his shoulder and whispered, "Don't speak. Save your strength. I'm here." Blood dripped steadily to the floor. The medics worked to dress my wound, but I kept my gaze locked on him. I wanted him to see with his own eyes. His father was not weak. His father was ready to bleed to keep him alive. At the hospital, they separated us. My arm needed stitches. His injuries were minor scrapes and a mild concussion. When the nurse wiped the blood from his face, I exhaled the breath I had been holding since the crash. He looked at me, lips trembling, but no words came. I didn't need them. His eyes already told the story. The seed had been planted. He had seen with his own eyes the truth. The man he thought useless was the same man who had thrown himself into danger without hesitation. Later, as I sat in the corridor with my arm wrapped thick in white bandages, exhaustion washed over me. Yet, deep in my chest, something flickered to life, not the fire of bitterness, but of resolve. That moment on the road, when my blood mingled with his, was the turning point. From then on, I knew the truth could no longer remain hidden, and I was ready. After the accident, the atmosphere in the house changed, but not with noise. It was like a lake once stormy, now eerily calm, with undercurrents swirling beneath. My son grew quieter. He no longer threw sharp words, but he had not yet spoken an apology either. He watched me often, eyes uneasy whenever they met mine, as if hundreds of questions crowded his mind, but he did not know where to begin. As for me, my chest still weighed heavy. I knew that the shock of the accident had cracked something inside him, but that was not enough. He had seen only one fragment the moment I threw myself to save him, but he had not seen the years, the hidden cost of my life. If I stayed silent, one day even that moment would fade, and he would return to the old belief. I could not allow it. That night, when the house had gone still, I opened the old wooden cabinet in the living room. I pulled out a battered box, its lid chipped, thick with dust. The smell of dampness filled the air as I opened it, revealing a world of the past. Yellowed papers surfaced. Each sheet was an old wound tearing open. There were loan contracts with my shaky signature, some small but, back then, enormous to me. There were hospital bills running pages long, each number a hammer strike. Certificates of blood donation bore my name and dates. A letter from my wife lay among them, written hastily in a hospital bed, begging me not to let the children know she almost died from complications, and that I had sold our only vehicle to pay the fees. I turned to medical files, diagnoses clearly written. Knee trauma, early degeneration risk, advised to avoid heavy labor. I remembered the doctor's eyes when he warned, "Mr. John, if you keep going, you may end up in a wheelchair." I nodded, left, and never spoke of it. In the box were also small things. A pair of worn children's shoes, the very ones I had broken my hands hauling cargo to buy for my son's first school day. The empty space where my wedding ring had been the ring I sold to save his fragile newborn life. A blood-stained cloth I had kept after surgery. as a reminder of the price of toil. I sat in the dim room, laying them out across the floor. Each object, each paper was a slice of my life. And for the first time, I resolved I would no longer hide them. The next morning, I gathered the family in the living room. My son sat across from me, his face a mixture of tension and curiosity. My wife and daughter stayed silent, the air thick. I set the wooden box on the table, the lid clicking open. Slowly, I pulled out each piece. The first loan paper I placed down. "Do you know this?" I said quietly. "This was the price so you could attend extra English classes when you were 10. I signed it, knowing I would repay it with sweat and blood." Then I laid out the hospital bill. "The night you were born premature, lying in an incubator, every number here came from my body breaking itself. I never told you because I wanted you to grow without the fear of poverty." I handed him the blood donation certificate. "The day your mother nearly died, I gave my blood, though I was sick with fever. I didn't speak of it because I thought it was duty, not something to boast of." Then came the letter from my wife. His hands shook as he held it, eyes moving slowly across the words. I saw his lips quiver, eyes cloud with tears. Finally, I placed the tiny shoe before him. "This," I whispered, "was the shoe you laughed in on your first day of school. My hands bled, carrying loads, so you could wear it. I never told you." Your smile was payment enough. The room was silent, broken only by his quickened breathing. He stared at the spread of papers and relics, his hands trembling into fists. I knew each piece was stitching together the picture he had never seen. I looked straight into his eyes. "Weak? Maybe. But this weakness built the roof over your head. This weakness kept you alive until this day." His lips trembled, but no words came. My wife and daughter's tears fell freely. My son's eyes turned red, a drop gathering, ready to fall. And in that moment, I knew the curtain had lifted. The truth was no longer hidden. He had seen with his own eyes, with undeniable proof, that what he once called weakness was in fact the silent strength that had carried him all along. From here, nothing would ever be the same. After the papers, letters, certificates, and the little worn shoe were spread across the table, it felt as if the room had been emptied of air. The silence thickened until even breathing seemed to disturb it. My son remained seated, shoulders slightly hunched, his hands trembling on his knees, the skin around his knuckles white from tension. His eyes were red, glassy, unable to lift and meet mine, as if the very act of looking would scorch him. My wife kept dabbing at the corners of her eyes with her sleeve, each motion hurried and shaky, the fabric already damp. My daughter had both palms pressed to her face, the small, stifled sobs escaping despite her effort to choke them back. I sat for a moment in that dense quiet, feeling the table's edge beneath my fingers. Then planted both hands and pushed myself upright. Pain flared in my legs, a sharp reminder of years that had piled up in my bones. But I refused to remain seated, refused to let the weight of what had been unsaid press me down again. I wanted my son to look at me, to truly see the man he had once called weak. The stillness was so complete that the faint creak of the floor under my step sounded like a strike of wood on wood. I filled my lungs, the breath rough in my throat, and when I spoke, my voice came out hoarse but clear, each word shaped with care so it would not waver. "Weak? Maybe," I said, letting the word hang in the air, a word I had carried like a hidden stone. "But, son, If it weren't for this so-called weakness, this endurance that bends and does not break this roof above our heads would not still be standing today. If I hadn't borne it in silence, if I hadn't kept going when there was nothing left in me to give, do you truly think you could have lived safely to this day? I lifted my hands so he could see them not as a flourish, but as simple evidence. The skin was mapped with pale lines and thickened ridges, old cuts that had mended without softness. My fingers quivered, not from fear, but from the body's memory of strain. These hands, I said softly, tore open and bled so you could have shoes on your first day of school. These legs, I added, feeling the ache pulse in my knees, cracked and still dragged me back to work so there would be money for your medicine. And this heart you called useless, do you know what it gave? It beat when it was too tired to beat. It gave blood when there was little to spare. It gave strength I did not have only to keep you alive. At that, my son finally lifted his gaze. It rose slowly, as if through thick water, until his eyes met mine. Pride had drained away. In its place I saw fear, fear of what he had not known, and the raw edge of regret beginning to form. His lips trembled, parted slightly. But I knew that if I left the ground now, if I slipped back into gentleness too soon, everything on this table, every paper, every proof might sink again into the old shadows. I took a step forward and set the stack of medical files down with a single solid thud that seemed to ripple through the room. Here, I said, tapping the folder. The doctors told me I could end up in a wheelchair if I kept doing what I was doing. They warned me clearly, and I went back anyway. Do you know why? I did not wait for an answer. Because I could not let you go hungry. Because I could not bear the thought of you lowering your head in shame among your classmates. I chose to carry all of it so that you could stand upright. My wife's self-control broke then. She began to sob openly, tears slipping down her cheeks as she pressed the heel of her hand to her mouth. My daughter's quiet crying turned into small, hiccuping gasps. My son lifted both hands and pressed them to his temples, elbows propped on his knees, as if he could push back time, as if he could force the truth to adjust itself to the story he had believed. I kept my eyes on him, not accusing, but unflinching. When I spoke again, my voice caught on the first word and then steadied. You told me I never did anything for this family, I said, not to wound him, but to bring that sentence into the same light that now shone on everything else. Then look, I pointed, not dramatically, but precisely, to the loan contracts with the shaky signature, to the hospital bills that seemed to stretch without end, to the blood donation certificates stamped with dates and my name, to the letter your mother wrote from a hospital bed telling me not to let you know how close we came to losing her, to the tiny shoe that once made you laugh because it matched the ones your friends wore. Every scar, every paper, every worn thing, each one is a thread, and together they are the rope that has held this family in place. I shook my head, slowly, the motion heavy with years. I do not need your gratitude, I said, and I meant it. I am not laying these things out to demand tribute. I need only this, that you understand. Behind what you called weakness, there has always been a strength, quiet, uncelebrated, but real, that raised you, that fed you, that kept you alive when you were too small to keep yourself alive. I felt my hand drift to my chest, palm spreading over the place where the ache had lived so long unchecked. My breathing had quickened. Each inhale roughened my throat. Each exhale trembled in the space between us. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. And still I did not feel fear. What I felt was release, a lightness that came not from the lifting of burdens, but from finally naming them where everyone could see. My son lowered his hands from his head and looked at me fully. The first tear slid down his cheek, quick and bright, and then another gathered at the rim of his eye. His mouth opened, the beginnings of an apology or an explanation caught there. But I raised a hand gently, not to silence him forever, only to hold the moment a little longer. "Don't speak yet," I said. "Let this land first. Let it live here with us. I may no longer be strong like before. I may no longer carry what I once carried. But remember this clearly. The same frailty you mocked, the same unsteady hands and aching legs was the strength that became your tomorrow." I stood there with my weight balanced carefully, knees protesting, fingers still trembling, but the line of my spine straight and sure. For years I had tried to be a pillar by holding everything in, believing that true strength was wordless. Now I understood that sometimes strength is the willingness to bring the hidden into the light and bear the look in your child's eyes when he finally sees you as you are. Around us, the room remained thick with tears, my wife's shoulders shaking as she reached for a tissue that wasn't there, my daughter wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand and staring at the papers as if they were pieces of a landscape she had walked through without ever seeing the map. The box sat open, its edges chipped, its contents no longer sleeping. The tiny shoe seemed impossibly small against the spread of bills and forms. The wedding ring's absence, a shape that said as much as any object could. I let the silence expand again. Not the old kind that smothered and hid, but a different kind that allowed each of us to look, to take in, to accept. "I should have shown you sooner," I said at last, not accusing myself, not begging forgiveness, only stating a fact that belonged to the past. "I thought I was protecting you. Perhaps I was also protecting myself from the fear that if I said these things out loud, I would somehow be asking for something in return." I shook my head again, lightly this time. "I am asking for nothing, only that you see." He nodded the smallest of motions, but in it was the first true acknowledgement, the first movement toward me across the distance we had both helped to create. His shoulders eased downward, the stiffness in his jaw slackened, the set of his mouth softened into something human and vulnerable. "There will be time for words," I said, hearing my voice steady into something that could hold us all. "There will be time for questions. For now, let the truth stand." I rested my fingers on the topmost medical file and then lifted them away, as if to show that it needed no further pressure from me. The house felt different still, yes, but no longer suffocating. The silence breathed. The light from the window caught the edge of a page and made it glow. In that softened air, with the proof of my life no longer folded away, I sensed something shift, almost imperceptibly. The gulf between father and son, narrowing from an abyss into a span that could, perhaps, be crossed. He had begun to see not the tidy story he had once told himself, but the larger, messier one, in which love can look like rags and signatures and scars, in which strength sometimes limps and shakes, and still refuses to sit down. And because he had begun to see, I felt, for the first time in years, that I was standing where I was meant to stand, not above him, not beneath him, but before him, visible. After my declaration, the room sank into a suffocating silence. My wife's and daughter's sobs broke through in trembling bursts. But my son remained wordless, his reddened eyes fixed on the void in front of him. On the table, the scattered papers, bills, letters, and the worn little shoe lay like exhibits in a trial I had convened. Yet I knew the most important truth had not yet been revealed. Slowly, I lowered myself into the chair again, resting my hand on my left arm. A decision rose within me with irresistible force. I could not let everything remain only in documents and relics. The most undeniable proof was my own body, the living map of a life spent in sacrifice. I drew in a breath, then began to roll up my sleeve. The motion was deliberate, slow, like peeling away the layers of skin that had hidden decades of truth. As the fabric slid back, scars emerged, some faded to faint white lines, some still thickened and dark, some jagged and rough. They crisscrossed my arm like roads on a map, a brutal but eloquent testimony. I held out the trembling arm toward my son. "Do you see this?" I said, my voice low but firm. "These are the cuts from hauling crates at night so I could pay your school fees. This one," I pointed to a long scar that ran down my forearm, "was the price of the day a steel bar fell and nearly crushed my arm. I bled, but went back to work the next morning." His eyes widened, lips quivering. He looked up at me, then back at the scars, as if trying to reconcile the body before him with the man he had dismissed as ordinary, as weak. But I did not stop. I reached for the hem of my trouser leg and slowly pulled it up. My knees were roughened, distorted, still marked with the ridge of an old surgical scar. The skin there was darkened, uneven, a sight that would make anyone wince. "These legs," I said, tapping them lightly, "once bore the weight of this family. The doctors warned me I could end up in a wheelchair if I kept going. But I kept walking. I kept working. Because you were too small to carry any burden." The silence deepened. My wife covered her face with both hands, sobbing openly. My daughter turned her head away, tears spilling unchecked. But my son, he could not take his eyes off the scars. His pupils dilated. His head gave a small shake, as if denying what lay before him. Yet his gaze clung, compelled by the truth. I pressed my hand to my chest and spoke slowly, each word falling heavy as iron. "If being weak means bleeding for you, then I'll choose weakness every time." The English came out sharp and resonant, ringing through the air. I repeated in my own tongue, so nothing would be lost. "Nếu yếu đuối có nghĩa là phải đổ máu vì con, cha sẽ chọn yếu đuối hết lần này đến lần khác, vì đó là bản năng của một người cha." The words filled the space, undeniable, irreversible. My son's shoulders began to shake. A single tear slid down his cheek, then another, until they fell in quick succession, pattering onto the table. And then he broke. A sob tore from him, and he collapsed forward, falling to his knees on the floor in front of me. He clutched my scarred legs, pressing his face against them as if seeking forgiveness from the very marks he had once ignored. "Dad, I was wrong. I didn't know. I didn't see it. I didn't see anything," he cried, his voice ragged with remorse. The sound of his sobbing mixed with the weeping of my wife and daughter, their voices joining into a chorus of grief and release. I bent down slowly, my hand scarred and trembling, and rested it on his head. My fingers tightened gently, the gesture both comfort and affirmation. My own tears welled and spilled down my cheeks, hot and unashamed. For the first time, I did not hide them. For the first time, I felt no shame in showing my pain. Instead, I felt lightness, even joy. because at last my son, the boy who had called me useless, had seen the truth with his own eyes. My voice, though thick with tears, came out steady, carrying the weight of a lifetime. Strength is not always about winning fights. Sometimes it is the scars you carry for the people you love. The words seemed to settle into the very walls. My wife's sobs softened into trembling breaths. My daughter's shoulders shook as she wiped her cheeks, and my son clung to me tighter, his tears soaking into the fabric of my trousers. The room was awash in tears and ragged breaths. But through that storm something greater was being healed. Bonds frayed by silence and pride were being rewoven in front of us. And I knew, as surely as I knew the scars on my own skin, that this moment would be carved into his heart forever. He would never again see weakness as uselessness. He would never again mistake silence for absence. He would know, now and always, that his father's frailty was the very form of strength that had carried him into life. My son's sobs filled the small room, echoing off the walls. He knelt, clutching my scarred, calloused legs, weeping like a child who had lost his way and finally found it again. Each broken cry struck my heart, no longer as pain, but as something gentler, deeper, a mixture of sorrow and release, both aching and liberating. My wife came forward, her eyes swollen and red, her trembling hand resting on our son's shoulder. Her voice broke as she spoke. My son, all these years, your father carried unimaginable hardships just so you could have this life. I blame myself too, for staying silent, for not telling you the truth. But now, remember, everything you see here, it is all love. My daughter could not hold back any more. She rushed to her brother's side, wrapping her arms around him from behind. Her tears streamed onto his shoulder as she whispered through her trembling lips, "Brother, I never blamed you, but I need you to understand. Father was never useless. He gave us everything, he just never said it out loud." My son clutched tighter, his words choking out between sobs. "Dad, I was wrong. I didn't know. I didn't see. I thought you were weak. I thought you didn't care. But all this time, you were carrying everything. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." I bent down, lifting his face gently with my scarred hands. His cheeks were soaked with tears, his eyes bloodshot, but in them I saw sincerity, remorse so raw it pierced me. My own tears slipped free, but a tender smile spread across my lips. "My son, I have never resented you. You simply could not see, could not understand. Now that you see, now that you know, hold on to it. I do not need an apology. I only need you to live with meaning, so that my sacrifices were not in vain." He nodded over and over, like a child, terrified of losing his last chance. He reached out and embraced me, arms strong, yet trembling. I wrapped him in my arms too, and for the first time in many years I felt his warmth as I had when he was little, when he used to curl into my chest to sleep. The whole family drew close, 4 bodies encircling one another, tears mingling, arms tightening. There was no more distance, no more wall of silence, only hearts beating together. After a long moment, I placed my hand firmly on my son's shoulder, my voice deep but gentle. "Stand up, my son. A man may kneel to repent, but he must stand to walk forward. And I want you to walk not with arrogance, but with gratitude." He wiped his face, then slowly rose. His eyes still glistened, but the look in them had changed. The defiance was gone. In its place burned resolve, as if from this day on he had truly become a man. My wife clasped my hand, squeezing tightly. In her gaze I saw pride and love that had gone unspoken for years. My daughter leaned against her mother's shoulder, whispering softly, "Father was never weak. He is the strongest person we will ever know." I smiled, tears still clinging to my cheeks, but my heart felt lighter than it had in decades, as though a mountain had been lifted. All I had ever wanted was this moment, the moment when my family finally understood, finally bonded through truth instead of silence. That evening, we all sat down together, sharing a simple meal. No one spoke much, but each bite of rice, each glance exchanged, each breath carried new meaning. It was not just dinner, it was a meal of healing, a meal that marked a new beginning, where father and son no longer stood apart, where love no longer hid in shadows. And in my heart a whisper rose. At last my son understands. At last my family has found one another again. In the days that followed, our house seemed reborn. No more silent meals, no more avoiding glances, no more hollow arguments. Instead, there was the hum of conversation, simple questions of care, and the warmth I had thought was lost forever. My son changed day by day. He no longer wandered into bars, no longer came home soaked in drink. Instead, I saw him rise early, help his mother tidy, ask his sister about her studies, and sometimes glance at me, only to lower his eyes with a shy smile. One morning he came close, extending a clenched hand. "Dad, I want to find a job. I want to earn my own money. I don't want to live dependent anymore." I looked at him, my eyes glistening. My own scarred, trembling hand clasped his tightly. I said nothing, only nodded, but inside, tears streamed silently into my heart. My wife also began to see me differently. No longer the woman who silently wept in the kitchen, she now often sat beside me, holding my rough hands and whispering, "You've suffered too much already. From now on, let me share the burden with you." My daughter filled our home with chatter, as if determined to cover the years of silence. She often leaned her head on my shoulder, murmuring, "Dad, never think you are weak. You are our hero." I listened quietly, letting each word soften my heart. Years of clenched endurance, years of misunderstanding now, they seemed to dissolve into air. One evening, as the last light of day poured through the window, my son sat before me, his face solemn. "Dad," he said, "I was wrong, but from today I promise to live differently. I'll become a man who carries responsibility, just like you." I looked at him for a long while, then replied slowly, "No, son, don't be like me. Be better than me. I lived my life by enduring and hiding. I want you to live by sharing, by gratitude. That is true strength." He nodded, and in the glow of sunset his eyes shone with a new light. That night the whole family sat together on the porch. The moon was bright, the wind gentle. I told him a saying I had carried silently for years. "Strength is not measured by how loud you roar, but by how much love you carry in silence." They all listened, their eyes glimmering. I knew they understood. And I too understood that it was time for me to stop straining to prove myself. I could grow old, I could grow frail, but within I had already won. Not victory over my son, but over the silence that once smothered love in this family. Later, when they had gone to bed, I stayed alone under the sky. Stars glittered above me. I thought of the road I had walked, the scars, the blood, the tears, and I smiled, because At last, my family had found each other again.